Have you ever been on a red-eye flight where someone's crying baby made you want to disappear into your seat? I'm curious where you're watching from tonight, because if you've ever traveled through Chicago O'Hare at midnight, you'll understand exactly how exhausted Selena Rodriguez felt as she dragged her worn duffel bag down the jet bridge. 28 and running on 3 hours of sleep, Selena had just endured the most humiliating job interview of her life. The marketing firm in Seattle had taken one look at her gap-filled resume and practically escorted her to the door. 6 months of searching, 6 months of rejection letters, and her savings account was now hovering dangerously close to empty. Again, the late-night flight back to Chicago was her cheapest option, even if it meant arriving home at 2 in the morning to relieve Mrs. Patterson, who was watching 4-year-old Miguel. Selena rubbed her temples as she shuffled toward the back of the plane, her economy ticket clutched in one hand, her phone showing 17 missed calls from her landlord in the other. The first-class cabin was nearly empty, just a handful of business travelers and one man who looked completely out of place. Selena's steps slowed as she passed his row, not because of how handsome he was, though the expensive suit and perfectly styled dark hair certainly caught her attention, but because of the sound coming from the infant carrier beside him. The baby's cries were piercing, desperate, the kind that made every passenger on the plane shift uncomfortably in their seats. The man looked like he was ready to crawl out of his own skin. His olive complexion had gone pale, his jaw clenched so tight, Selena wondered if he might crack a tooth. He was probably in his early 30s, tall enough that even sitting down his broad shoulders dominated the space. But right now he looked smaller somehow, defeated by a 6-month-old baby. Selena had seen that expression before. It was the same helpless panic she'd felt when Miguel was an infant, and nothing she did seemed to calm his colicky nights. The difference was, she'd been alone by choice after Miguel's father disappeared. This man had the look of someone thrust into parenthood without preparation or support. The baby's cries intensified as the flight attendant approached the man's seat, her smile tight with professional patience. Selena paused at the edge of first class, pretending to adjust her bag while she listened. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" the attendant asked, her voice carefully modulated despite the chaos. The man's hands moved helplessly over the car seat straps. "I don't know what's wrong with her. She's been crying since we boarded. Is there something I should do?" His voice carried the slight accent of someone who'd learned English as a second language, Italian maybe, and underneath the polished tone Selena heard genuine distress. The flight attendant's smile became even more strained. "Babies cry, sir. Perhaps if you could keep her quiet during takeoff, other passengers might appreciate it." The man's eyes flashed with something dangerous, a look that made Selena instinctively step back. He didn't raise his voice, but when he spoke, there was steel underneath the words. "If I knew how to keep her quiet, don't you think I would have done it already?" The attendant retreated quickly, and Selena noticed the way other passengers were starting to stare. A businessman in the row across was shaking his head, clearly annoyed. An elderly woman was making no effort to hide her disapproval. The baby's cries grew more frantic, and the man's composure began to crumble entirely. Selena had been in his shoes. She remembered the judgment, the way people looked at you like you were failing at the most basic human task. Her heart went out to him despite every rational thought telling her to keep walking to her own seat and mind her own business. She'd always been terrible at minding her own business. "Excuse me," Selena heard herself saying, stepping closer to his row. "I'm sorry to bother you, but would you like some help?" The man looked up at her with eyes that were the color of espresso, dark and intense, framed by lashes that belonged in a magazine. Up close, he was even more striking, with sharp cheekbones and a mouth that probably smiled easily when he wasn't in crisis mode. But it was the exhaustion in those beautiful eyes that made her heart squeeze. "You know about babies?" he asked, and there was such hope in his voice that Selena felt her chest tighten. "I have a 4-year-old son," she said simply. "Sometimes a fresh pair of hands helps." The man studied her for a long moment, and Selena became acutely aware that she probably looked like she'd been traveling for 12 hours, her dark hair escaping its ponytail, her clearance rack blazer wrinkled from the airplane seat. Whatever he saw in her face must have convinced him, because he nodded slowly. "Please," he said, and the single word carried so much relief that Selena felt tears prick her eyes. She slipped into the empty seat beside him, setting her bag on the floor, and immediately reached for the car seat. The baby was tiny, maybe 6 months old, with a cap of fine dark hair and the kind of cherubic face that belonged on baby food commercials. Right now, that angelic face was red with fury, tiny fists waving as she screamed her displeasure with the world. "What's her name?" Selena asked, automatically beginning the practiced routine of checking for obvious problems. "Diaper, temperature, hunger signs." "Isabella," the man said, watching Selena's movements with intense focus. "She's 6 months old. I fed her before we boarded, changed her diaper. I don't understand why she won't stop crying." Selena lifted Isabella from the car seat, supporting her head carefully, and immediately felt the baby's body relax slightly against her chest. "Sometimes they just need movement," she murmured, standing and beginning a gentle swaying motion. The airplane aisle was narrow, but she managed a small bounce step that seemed to calm the baby's sobs to hiccups. "How did you do that?" the man asked, his voice filled with wonder. Selena looked down at Isabella, who was now looking around with curious dark eyes, her crying replaced by the occasional shuddering breath. "Practice," she said softly, then glanced back at the man. "I'm Selena, by the way." "Dante," he replied, extending his hand. "Dante Moretti. And I owe you my sanity." His handshake was firm, warm, and Selena noticed the expensive watch on his wrist, the subtle scent of cologne that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. Everything about him screamed money and power, from his perfectly tailored suit to the way he carried himself even in exhaustion. The question was, what was a man like that doing alone with a baby, looking like he'd never held one before in his life? Isabella made a soft cooing sound, her tiny hand grasping at Selena's finger, and Selena felt the familiar tug of maternal instinct. This baby needed someone who knew what they were doing, and judging by Dante's grateful expression, that someone wasn't him. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, requesting all passengers take their seats for takeoff. Selena looked toward the back of the plane where her economy seat waited, then at Isabella, who was now contentedly sucking her thumb against Selena's shoulder. "I should get back to my seat," Selena said reluctantly, but Dante's hand shot out to stop her. "Wait," he said, his voice urgent. Could you stay? Just until she settles? I'll pay the difference for you to sit in first class." Selena blinked in surprise. "That wasn't necessary," she started to say, but Isabella chose that moment to let out another wail, and Dante's expression became desperate again. "Please," he said again. "I don't know what I'm doing, and you clearly do. I'll make sure you're compensated for the inconvenience." The way he said compensated made Selena wonder exactly what kind of business Dante Moretti was in, but Isabella's cries were already subsiding again as Selena resumed the gentle bouncing motion. Against her better judgment, she nodded. "Okay," she said, "just until she calms down." But as the plane lifted off and Isabella settled into peaceful sleep in her arms, Selena had the strangest feeling that this unexpected encounter was going to change everything. The flight attendant didn't even blink when Dante quietly moved Selena's bag to the empty first-class seat beside him. Isabella had been sleeping peacefully in Selena's arms for 20 minutes now, her tiny body relaxed against Selena's chest, and neither adult wanted to risk disturbing the peace they'd fought so hard to achieve. Selena had never sat in first class before. The leather seats were softer than anything in her apartment, and there was actual legroom, enough space that she could shift position without bumping into Dante. Not that she particularly wanted to avoid bumping into him, she realized with a start. He smelled like expensive cologne and something else, something warm and masculine that made her hyper-aware of how close they were sitting. "She's perfect," Selena murmured, looking down at Isabella's sleeping face. The baby's features were delicate, with long dark lashes that fanned across chubby cheeks and a rosebud mouth that moved slightly as she dreamed. "How old did you say she was?" 6 months, Dante replied, his voice softer now than it had been during his earlier panic. 6 months and 12 days, actually. The precision of that answer told Selena everything she needed to know about how closely Dante was tracking his daughter's life. She glanced at him sideways, noting the way he was studying Isabella's face like he was trying to memorize it, and felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't a man who'd planned to become a single father. "That's a beautiful age," Selena said carefully. "They start showing their personalities around 6 months. Isabella's lucky to have you." Dante's laugh was bitter, devoid of any humor. Lucky isn't the word I'd use. Her mother would still be alive if it wasn't for me. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with pain and guilt. Selena felt her heart squeeze as she processed what he'd just revealed. A widower. Isabella's mother had died, and judging by the raw grief in Dante's voice, it had been recent. Very recent. I'm so sorry, Selena said quietly, instinctively adjusting her hold on Isabella to shield her from the conversation. What happened? Dante was quiet for so long that Selena thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Complications during delivery. Sophia was in labor for 18 hours. They said everything was fine. That first babies sometimes take time. But then her blood pressure spiked, and she started bleeding, and they couldn't stop it. Isabella was born healthy, but Sophia died 3 hours later. Selena closed her eyes, imagining the nightmare he'd just described. To lose your wife and become a father in the same day. To have joy and devastation intertwined so completely that you couldn't separate them. No wonder he looked like he was drowning. Dante, I'm so sorry, she repeated, wishing she had better words, something that could possibly touch the depth of his loss. That's unimaginable. He nodded, his jaw tight with the effort of maintaining composure. The worst part is, I don't know what I'm doing with her. Sophia was the one who knew about babies, who planned everything, read all the books. I've had 3 nannies quit in 6 months because Isabella cries constantly and I can't figure out what she needs. The latest one quit yesterday with no notice, said she couldn't handle it anymore. That explained the desperation Selena had seen in his eyes, the panic when Isabella wouldn't stop crying. This man was grieving his wife while trying to raise a baby he had no idea how to care for, and he was failing at the one thing that mattered most. Isabella stirred in Selena's arms, making soft baby sounds that were infinitely better than the screaming from earlier. Without thinking, Selena began humming quietly, an old Spanish lullaby her mother had sung to her years ago. The baby settled immediately, her breathing evening out again. How do you do that? Dante asked, watching the interaction with fascination. You're a natural with her. Selena felt heat rise in her cheeks at the admiration in his voice. I told you, I have a 4-year-old. Miguel was colicky as a baby, cried for hours every night until he was about 8 months old. I learned every trick in the book just to survive. Where's Miguel's father? Dante asked, and there was something careful in the way he posed the question, like he was trying to determine if there was a man in her life. Gone, Selena said simply. He left when Miguel was 6 months old, said he wasn't ready for the responsibility. I haven't seen or heard from him since. So you raised him alone. It wasn't really a question, and Selena nodded. It's just been the 2 of us. It's hard sometimes, but Miguel's worth it. He's the best thing I've ever done. She could feel Dante studying her profile as she looked down at Isabella and wondered what he was seeing. Probably a tired single mother in discount clothes, someone from a completely different world than his expensive suits and first-class lifestyle. But when she glanced at him, his expression wasn't judgmental. If anything, he looked impressed. You're stronger than I am, he said quietly. I've had nannies and housekeepers and a mother who comes over every day to help, and I still feel like I'm failing her constantly. You're not failing her, Selena said firmly. You're grieving, and you're learning. That's completely different. Isabella knows you love her, even if you don't always know exactly what she needs. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, jolting them both sideways. Selena instinctively tightened her grip on Isabella while bracing herself against the armrest, but Dante's arm came around them both, steadying her. For a moment, she was pressed against his side, could feel the solid warmth of his chest, the strength in the arm that held her secure. The scent of his cologne surrounded her, and she had the strangest urge to lean into his embrace instead of pulling away. Sorry, he murmured, but he didn't immediately move his arm, and Selena didn't immediately pull back. They stayed that way for several heartbeats, the 3 of them forming an unexpected tableau of intimacy 30,000 feet above the ground. When the turbulence passed and Dante's arm dropped away, Selena felt the loss of contact more acutely than she should have. She'd known this man for less than 2 hours, but something about the combination of his vulnerability and strength was drawing her in despite every rational voice in her head warning her to be careful. What do you do for work? She asked, trying to redirect her thoughts to safer territory. Besides traveling with beautiful babies, I mean. Dante's expression shuddered slightly, and Selena caught a glimpse of the dangerous look she'd seen earlier when he'd spoken to the flight attendant. Import business, he said after a pause. International trade, mostly with Europe. The vague answer and the way he'd avoided her eyes told Selena there was more to it than that, but she didn't push. Everyone had secrets, and she'd shared enough of her own for one conversation. What about you? He asked. What takes you to Seattle? Job interview, Selena said with a grimace. Marketing position at a consulting firm. It didn't go well. Their loss, Dante said with such conviction that Selena felt her cheeks warm again. Anyone who can calm Isabella like that clearly has skills they were too stupid to recognize. Isabella chose that moment to wake up, blinking slowly as she looked around with curious dark eyes. When she spotted Selena's face above her, she broke into a gummy smile that made Selena's heart melt completely. Oh, she's gorgeous, Selena whispered, unable to resist stroking the baby's soft cheek. Look at that smile. Dante leaned closer to see his daughter's expression, close enough that Selena could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. She only does that for you, he said wonderfully. I haven't seen her smile like that since. Well, since Sophia died. The admission was clearly difficult for him, and Selena felt tears prick her eyes at the pain in his voice. Without thinking, she reached over and covered his hand with hers, squeezing gently. She'll smile for you too, she said softly. It just takes time. Babies can sense when we're stressed, but they also sense when we're trying. She knows you love her, Dante. He turned his hand palm up, threading their fingers together, and Selena's breath caught at the contact. His hands were large, warm, with calluses that suggested he did more than just office work, and the way his thumb brushed across her knuckles sent unexpected heat up her arm. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their descent into Chicago, and Selena felt a sharp stab of disappointment. The flight was ending, which meant this strange, intimate bubble they'd created was about to burst. She'd go back to her empty apartment and her stack of rejection letters, and Dante would go back to his world of expensive suits and mysterious import businesses, and she'd never see either of them again. The thought bothered her more than it should have. Isabella made a soft sound, reaching up to grab at Selena's hair, and Dante smiled. The first genuine smile Selena had seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. The dangerous edge softened, the grief lightened, and she caught a glimpse of what he must have been like before loss had carved hollows around his eyes. She likes you, he said, watching his daughter's fascination with Selena's dark waves. I've never seen her this comfortable with a stranger. Maybe I'm not a stranger anymore, Selena replied, then immediately felt foolish for the presumption. They'd shared one conversation, one moment of connection. That didn't make them anything to each other. But Dante didn't look like he thought the comment was foolish. Instead, he was studying her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. Selena, he said slowly, like he was testing out her name. I know this might sound crazy, but would you consider working for me? As Isabella's nanny, I mean. You're clearly gifted with children, and she responds to you in a way she never has with anyone else. I could pay you well, very well, and you'd have your own space, complete autonomy with your schedule. Selena's mouth fell open in shock. A job offer. From a stranger on a plane. A stranger who was clearly wealthy enough to make whatever salary he was thinking of worth her while. A stranger whose baby had claimed a piece of her heart in the space of a 3-hour flight. She started, then stopped, looking down at Isabella, who was still playing with her hair and babbling contentedly. The rational part of her mind was screaming that this was insane, that you don't uproot your entire life based on one conversation with a man you don't know. But the desperate part of her mind, the part that was tired of rejection and worry and counting every penny, whispered that maybe this was the opportunity she'd been praying for. I have a son, she said slowly. Miguel. He'd have to come with me. Of course, Dante said immediately. There's plenty of space, and he'd be welcome. More than welcome. I don't even know you, Selena protested. But even as she said it, she was imagining what it would be like to wake up every day knowing she could provide for Miguel, knowing she had meaningful work with a baby who clearly needed her. No, you don't, Dante agreed. But you know Isabella needs you. And I think maybe we need each other too. The plane touched down with a gentle bump, and around them passengers began gathering their belongings. Selena realized she was at a crossroads. One of those moments that would define the direction of her entire life. She could walk away, go back to her old life of struggle and uncertainty, or she could take a leap of faith with this mysterious man and his beautiful daughter. Isabella made a happy sound, patting Selena's cheek with one tiny hand, and Selena felt her resolve crystallize. "Okay," she heard herself saying. "Yes, I'll do it." Dante's relief was so profound that Selena wondered if he'd been holding his breath. When he smiled this time, it reached his eyes, transforming him from a man drowning in grief to someone who'd just been thrown a lifeline. "Thank you," he said simply, but the words carried the weight of everything he couldn't say. "Thank you for saving us both." The mansion in Lincoln Park was nothing like the modest two-bedroom apartment Selena had shared with Miguel for the past 4 years. Standing on the wide stone steps with their hastily packed suitcases, she tilted her head back to take in the full scope of Dante's home and felt her stomach clench with nerves. The building rose 4 stories above the tree-lined street, all elegant limestone and gleaming windows, the kind of place she'd only seen in magazines or movies about people whose lives bore no resemblance to her own. Miguel pressed closer to her side, his small hand slipping into hers as he stared up at the imposing facade. "Mama," he whispered in Spanish, "is this really where we're going to live?" "Just for a little while." "Mijo," Selena replied, though the words felt strange on her tongue. 3 days had passed since the flight. 3 days of frantic arrangements and second-guessing her impulsive decision. Now, standing here with everything she owned packed into 2 battered suitcases, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The front door opened before she could knock, revealing a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. She was wearing a simple black dress with an apron, and something about her warm smile immediately put Selena at ease. "You must be Selena," the woman said, stepping aside to welcome them in. "I'm Maria Santos, the housekeeper. Dante told me to expect you and your son." Maria's accent carried the familiar cadence of home, and Selena felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Hello, Maria. This is Miguel." Maria crouched down to Miguel's level, her smile widening as she switched to Spanish. "What a handsome young man you are. Are you ready to see your new home?" Miguel nodded shyly, still clinging to Selena's hand, but his eyes were already wandering to take in the grand foyer behind Maria. The ceiling soared 2 stories above them, with a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than Selena's yearly salary. The floors were polished marble, and a sweeping staircase curved up to the 2nd floor with carved wooden banisters that gleamed like silk. "Dante is at the office, but he should be home by 6, Maria said, leading them through the foyer. "Let me show you to your rooms, and then we can get Isabella. She's been fussy all morning, poor little thing." They climbed the main staircase, their footsteps echoing despite the thick Persian runner that covered the marble steps. The 2nd-floor hallway was lined with family portraits and original artwork that Selena was afraid to look at too closely, certain she'd recognize the names of famous artists if she did. "This will be your room," Maria said, opening a door to reveal a bedroom that was larger than Selena's entire previous living room. The furniture was elegant without being ostentatious, cream and gold fabrics that looked expensive but comfortable. French doors opened onto a small balcony overlooking the private garden behind the house. "Miguel's room is right next door," Maria continued, leading them to another door. "Dante had it prepared as soon as you called yesterday." Miguel's new bedroom was clearly designed for a child, but nothing like the cramped space he'd shared with Selena's makeshift office in their old apartment. There was a twin bed with a navy blue comforter, a desk by the window, built-in bookshelves, and even a small television. Miguel released Selena's hand for the first time since they'd arrived and walked slowly to the window, pressing his face against the glass. "There's a pool," he said in wonder, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mama, there's a swimming pool in the backyard." Selena's throat tightened as she watched her son's amazement. Miguel had never had his own bedroom, had never had space to spread out his few toys or books. The idea that this could be temporary felt cruel now that she saw what they'd be giving up when this arrangement inevitably ended. "Isabella's nursery is just down the hall," Maria said gently, clearly noticing Selena's emotional response. "Would you like to see her?" The nursery was a study in understated luxury, pale yellow walls with delicate white furniture and a rocking chair positioned by the window to catch the afternoon light. Isabella was standing in her crib, gripping the rails and making soft, unhappy sounds that would probably escalate to full crying soon. The moment Isabella saw Selena, her expression brightened and she lifted her arms, reaching through the crib slats with obvious desire to be picked up. Selena couldn't help but smile as she lifted the baby, feeling the now familiar sense of rightness as Isabella settled contentedly against her chest. "She's been doing that since you called," Maria said with approval. "Every time someone walks in, she hopes it's you. That little one knows you're special." As they returned to the main floor, Selena began noticing details that sent small warning signals through her mind. The windows were thicker than normal glass, and she caught glimpses of discreet security cameras positioned at strategic angles. The front door had what looked like an electronic lock system far more sophisticated than anything she'd seen in regular homes. When they passed Dante's study, she noticed the door was solid hardwood with multiple locks. Maria noticed her attention to the security measures. "Dante takes safety very seriously," she said carefully. "His business requires certain precautions." "What kind of business exactly?" Selena asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Maria's expression became guarded. "Import and export, like he told you. But there are always risks when dealing with international commerce. People who might want to take advantage of success." The evasive answer only heightened Selena's growing suspicions, but before she could ask follow-up questions, Miguel appeared at her elbow, his eyes wide with excitement. "Mama, Maria says there's a game room downstairs with video games, and a library with actual books, and the kitchen has 2 ovens. 2 ovens, Mama." His enthusiasm was infectious, and despite her concerns about Dante's mysterious business dealings, Selena found herself smiling at her son's joy. When was the last time Miguel had been this excited about anything? When was the last time he'd had space to run and explore instead of being confined to their tiny apartment? The afternoon passed quickly as Selena settled into her new routine with Isabella. The baby was indeed fussy with everyone else, but transformed into a contented angel in Selena's arms. They spent hours in the nursery and the beautiful living room, Isabella playing with toys that were clearly expensive but barely touched, while Miguel explored his new domain with the careful reverence of someone afraid to break something valuable. By 5:30, Selena had Isabella fed, changed, and ready for an evening nap, and the domestic rhythm felt surprisingly natural. She'd always been good at creating routines, at making spaces feel like home even when they weren't permanent. But something about this house felt different. Maybe it was the way Isabella relaxed completely in her arms, or the way Miguel was humming happily as he arranged his few books on the built-in shelves in his room. But this felt less like a job and more like a life. The kitchen was Maria's domain, but she'd encouraged Selena to make herself at home, and when Isabella went down for her nap, Selena found herself standing in front of the professional-grade stove, thinking about dinner. She'd been cooking for herself and Miguel for years, stretching ingredients and making miracles from whatever was on sale. But this kitchen was equipped for serious cooking. 2 ovens, as Miguel had noted with awe, a gas range with 6 burners, counter space that went on forever. Without quite planning it, she found herself pulling ingredients from the well-stocked refrigerator and pantry. Maria had left to run errands. Miguel was absorbed in exploring his room, and Isabella was sleeping peacefully. For the first time in months, Selena felt the familiar calm that came from cooking, the meditative process of chopping vegetables and building flavors. She was stirring a pot of soup when she heard the front door open, followed by footsteps on the marble floor. Dante was home, and suddenly Selena was hyper-aware of how domestic this scene must look. Her standing in his kitchen wearing jeans and one of his old aprons that Maria had found for her, dinner cooking on his expensive stove. "Selena?" Dante's voice carried surprise as he appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Something smells incredible." He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, and the sight of his forearms distracted Selena for a moment before she found her voice. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing toward the stove. "I made soup, and there's bread in the oven. I wasn't sure what time you usually eat." Dante moved closer, close enough that she caught his familiar scent of cologne and something else, something that made her pulse quicken despite her best efforts to maintain professional boundaries. When he looked around the kitchen, taking in the organized chaos of meal preparation, His expression was wondering. I can't remember the last time someone cooked in this kitchen, he said quietly. Maria usually just prepares simple things, or we order takeout. This feels like home. The word hung between them, loaded with implications that Selena wasn't sure she was ready to examine. She busied herself checking the bread, using the movement to put some distance between them, but she could feel his eyes on her as she moved around his kitchen with increasing confidence. Where's Isabella? He asked. Napping, Selena replied. She had a good afternoon. We played. She had her bottle, and she went down without any fussing. She's been sleeping for about an hour. Dante's smile was soft, grateful. You've worked magic with her already. I could hear the difference the moment I walked in the house. There's a piece here that hasn't existed since Sophia died. The mention of his late wife brought reality crashing back, reminding Selena that she was here to do a job, not to play house with a man she barely knew. But before she could respond, Dante's phone rang, the sound sharp and intrusive in the warm kitchen atmosphere. His expression changed immediately when he looked at the caller ID, all warmth draining from his face as the mask of professional control slipped back into place. Excuse me, he said, stepping away from her. This is business. He answered the call in rapid Italian, his voice low but intense. And even though Selena couldn't understand the words, she recognized the tone. It was the same edge she'd heard on the airplane when he'd spoken to the flight attendant. The suggestion of barely contained danger that reminded her she didn't really know anything about the man who'd invited her into his home. The conversation grew more heated, and she caught familiar words among the Italian. Money. Problem. Tonight. When Dante switched to English, clearly so the person on the other end would understand him perfectly, his voice was cold as winter. I don't care what Vitali thinks he's owed, Dante said. The terms were clear, and if he can't honor them, there will be consequences. Handle it, or I will. He ended the call and stood with his back to her for several seconds, his shoulders tense with barely contained anger. When he finally turned around, Selena saw a glimpse of something that made her stomach clench with sudden fear. This wasn't the grief-stricken father from the airplane or the grateful employer who'd welcomed her into his home. This was someone else entirely, someone dangerous. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice was carefully controlled again. Business emergency. Nothing for you to worry about. But as Selena served soup and tried to make normal conversation through dinner, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just gotten her first real glimpse into Dante Moretti's world, and it was nothing like the import business he described. Whatever he was really involved in, it was dangerous enough to require bulletproof windows and sophisticated security systems, dangerous enough to put that lethal edge in his voice when he talked about consequences. She'd brought her son into this world, and for the first time since accepting Dante's offer, Selena wondered if the price of financial security might be higher than she'd ever imagined. 2 weeks into their new life, Selena had fallen into a rhythm that felt dangerously close to belonging. Isabella woke at 6:30 every morning reaching for her with tiny hands and a sleepy smile. Miguel bounded downstairs for breakfast with an enthusiasm she hadn't seen since he was a toddler, and Dante had started lingering over coffee in the mornings, watching her move through his kitchen with an expression she was afraid to analyze too closely. The nights were harder. It was just past midnight when Isabella's cries echoed through the baby monitor, pulling Selena from the edge of sleep. She'd learned to recognize the different types of crying in the past 14 days, and this wasn't hunger or discomfort. This was the restless, overtired wailing that meant Isabella had fought sleep too long and now couldn't find her way back to peace. Selena padded down the hallway in her pajamas, her bare feet silent on the thick carpet, but when she reached the nursery doorway, she found Dante already there. He was standing beside the crib in dark pajama pants and nothing else, his hair tousled from sleep, trying to soothe his daughter with gentle words and increasingly desperate bouncing motions. The sight of him shirtless stopped Selena in her tracks. She'd grown accustomed to his expensive suits and carefully styled appearance, but this version of Dante was devastatingly attractive in an entirely different way. His chest was broad and muscled, marked with a few scars she hadn't expected, and the way he cradled Isabella against his skin with such careful tenderness made something flutter deep in Selena's stomach. She's been crying for 20 minutes, Dante said without turning around, exhaustion evident in his voice. I didn't want her to wake you, but nothing I'm doing is working. Selena stepped into the room, close enough to smell the sleep-warmed scent of his skin and see the frustration tightening the muscles across his shoulders. Sometimes they just need to feel safe, she said softly, reaching for Isabella. May I? Dante transferred his daughter to Selena's arms with obvious relief, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange and sending unexpected heat up her arms. Isabella's cries immediately softened to hiccups as she settled against Selena's shoulder, her tiny fist grasping at the soft cotton of Selena's sleep shirt. How do you do that? Dante asked, the wonder in his voice now familiar after 2 weeks of watching Selena work magic with his daughter. It's like she knows you're her person. Maybe she does, Selena murmured, beginning the gentle swaying motion that had become second nature. She started humming quietly, the same Spanish lullaby her mother had sung to her, and Isabella's breathing began to even out almost immediately. Dante moved closer, close enough that Selena could feel the warmth radiating from his bare chest, and his voice was soft when he spoke again. Sophia used to sing to her before she was born. She'd put headphones on her belly and play music, convinced that Isabella could hear it. Classical mostly, some Italian folk songs her grandmother had taught her. The mention of his late wife should have created distance between them, but instead Selena found herself leaning slightly into his presence. What was she like? She asked, surprising herself with the question. Dante was quiet for so long that Selena thought he wouldn't answer. They'd been living in the same house for 2 weeks, sharing meals and conversations about Isabella's development and Miguel's adjustment to his new school, but he'd never talked about Sophia beyond the basic facts of her death. She was sunshine, he finally said, his voice rough with memory. Always laughing, always seeing the best in people. She made me want to be better than I was, cleaner than the world I came from. She never fully understood what my family did, and I kept it that way because I wanted to protect her innocence. Selena felt her heart clench at the pain in his voice. She loved you, she said simply. That's what matters. Did she? Dante turned to look at Selena directly, and she was startled by the vulnerability in his dark eyes. Or did she love the version of me I showed her? Because there are parts of my life, parts of who I am, that would have terrified her. We all have parts of ourselves we hide, Selena replied carefully. That doesn't make the love less real. Dante reached out slowly, his fingers ghosting across Isabella's downy hair as she slept in Selena's arms. What parts do you hide, Selena? What would terrify me if I knew? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond employer and employee. Selena found herself studying his face in the dim light from the nursery lamp, noticing the way his eyes had darkened, the way his gaze kept dropping to her lips. I'm not the one with bulletproof windows and security cameras, she said quietly. I think your secrets are probably more dangerous than mine. Something shifted in Dante's expression, a flash of the same dangerous edge she'd seen during his phone call that first night. You noticed that, he said, but it wasn't really a question. I notice a lot of things, Selena replied. Like the way you speak Italian when you're angry, and the way Maria changes the subject whenever I ask about your business, and the way you check your phone constantly like you're waiting for bad news. Dante moved even closer, close enough that if Selena tilted her head up, their lips would be inches apart. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb stroking gently across her skin, and she felt her breathing quicken despite every rational voice telling her to step back. You should be afraid of me, he said softly. Of what I do, of the world I live in. You should take Miguel and run before you get pulled in too deep. But even as he said it, his thumb continued its gentle caress, and his eyes were searching her face like he was memorizing every detail. Selena felt herself leaning into his touch, drawn by the contradiction between his words of warning and the tenderness in his hands. Maybe I should be afraid, she whispered back. But I'm not. The kiss happened slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Dante's lips brushed hers softly at first, testing, and when she didn't retreat, he deepened the contact with careful hunger. His free hand came up to cradle the back of her neck, fingers threading through her hair, and Selena felt heat spiral through her body as she kissed him back. Isabella was still sleeping peacefully between them, and something about the intimacy of the moment, the three of them in the quiet nursery with moonlight streaming through the windows, made Selena's chest tighten with emotions she wasn't ready to name. The sharp sound of Dante's phone ringing shattered the moment like glass. He pulled back immediately, his expression shifting from tender to alert in the space of a heartbeat, and Selena felt the loss of his touch like a physical ache. "I have to take this," he said, grabbing his phone from the dresser and checking the caller ID. His face went hard when he saw the name. "Take Isabella back to your room, lock the door, and don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "What?" Selena started to ask, but Dante was already answering the call in rapid Italian, his voice sharp with authority and barely contained violence. She caught enough words to understand that something had gone wrong, that there was immediate danger, and that Dante was giving orders to armed men. "Now, Selena," Dante said, covering the phone's mouthpiece. "Please." The please was what convinced her to move. Selena hurried to her room with Isabella still sleeping in her arms, her heart racing as she heard Dante's voice echoing through the house, cold and commanding in a way that sent chills down her spine. She locked her door as instructed and sat on her bed with Isabella, listening to the sounds of movement throughout the house, voices she didn't recognize, the slam of car doors outside. It was 3 hours before Dante knocked softly on her door. "It's safe now," he said when she opened it, but the dangerous edge was still there in his eyes, and she noticed fresh scratches on his knuckles. "We need to talk." They went to his study, a room Selena had never entered before, and she immediately understood why. The walls were lined with books, but they were also covered with photographs, documents, and what looked like surveillance images. There was a gun safe in the corner that wasn't even trying to be discreet, and Dante's desk held multiple phones and computer monitors showing feeds from security cameras around the property. "Sit, please," Dante said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. "I owe you the truth." Selena sat, still holding Isabella, and waited for him to continue. Dante poured himself a drink from the bar in the corner, downing it in one swallow before turning to face her. "My name is Dante Moretti, and my family has been part of organized crime in Chicago for 3 generations, he said without preamble. "I'm the underboss of our organization, which means I'm responsible for day-to-day operations and territory disputes. What you witnessed tonight was retaliation against a rival family who thought they could move against us while we were distracted by personal matters." The words hit Selena like physical blows. Organized crime. Mafia. The dangerous world she'd suspected but hoped wasn't real was worse than she'd imagined. "The scratches on my hands aren't from gardening," Dante continued, his voice carefully controlled. "The security measures aren't just precautions. People want me dead, Selena, and they'll use anyone I care about to get to me. That includes Isabella, and now it includes you and Miguel." Selena's arms tightened protectively around the sleeping baby. "You're telling me we're in danger because we live here?" "I'm telling you that you're in danger because I'm selfish enough to want you here despite the risks," Dante said, his honesty brutal in its directness. "Tonight's incident was contained, but there will be others. There are always others in this life." Selena stood up, pacing to the window where she could see unmarked security vehicles positioned around the property perimeter. "You should have told me this before I brought Miguel here," she said, anger finally cutting through her shock. "I had a right to know what I was getting him into." "Yes, you did," Dante agreed. "I told myself I was protecting you by keeping you in the dark, but the truth is I was protecting myself. I couldn't risk losing you before you understood how much we need you." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Selena turned back to face him, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not just the grieving widower or the generous employer, but the dangerous man who lived in a world of violence and shadows. Isabella stirred in her arms, making soft baby sounds, and Selena looked down at the innocent face that had stolen her heart. This baby hadn't chosen her father's life, hadn't asked to be born into a world where she needed bodyguards and bulletproof windows. "What happens if I stay?" Selena asked quietly. "I do everything in my power to keep you all safe," Dante said immediately. "Increased security, restricted movement when necessary, complete transparency about any threats. You'll never be unprotected again. And if I leave?" Dante's face went carefully blank. "Then you take Miguel somewhere far away, change your names, and pray that our enemies never figure out how much you meant to us." The pronoun wasn't lost on Selena. Us. Not just Dante, but Isabella too. The baby who'd bonded with her completely, who cried for her when she left the room, who smiled like sunshine when Selena sang Spanish lullabies. She looked down at Isabella again, at the perfect features that were so like her father's, and felt her decision crystallize with startling clarity. "Then I guess we're staying," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "But I want to know everything from now on. No more secrets, no more protection through ignorance. If Miguel and I are going to be part of this world, then we're going to be informed participants, not innocent bystanders." Dante's relief was so profound that Selena wondered if he'd been holding his breath. "You're sure?" he asked. "Because once you're in, really in, there's no going back to normal life." Selena looked around the study, at the evidence of the dangerous world she was choosing to enter, then back at Dante's face. Normal life was struggling to pay rent, and watching Miguel pretend he didn't want things we couldn't afford, she said. "This might be complicated, but it's not worse than being alone." When Dante smiled, it was the first genuine happiness she'd seen from him since that moment on the airplane when Isabella had first calmed in her arms. "We'll figure it out together," he said softly. "All of us." The sound of gunfire shattered the peaceful Tuesday afternoon like breaking glass. Selena was in the nursery with Isabella when the first shots echoed from somewhere beyond the garden walls, followed immediately by the harsh blare of the security alarm. Isabella startled awake from her nap and began crying. But Selena barely heard her over the thundering of her own heartbeat as training she didn't know she possessed kicked in automatically. "Lock the door. Get away from windows. Keep Isabella quiet." She scooped the baby from her crib and ran to her bedroom, her hands shaking as she turned the deadbolt Maria had installed just days earlier. Through the thick glass of her bedroom window, she could see black SUVs positioned around the property perimeter and men in dark clothing moving with military precision across the grounds. Where was Miguel? The thought hit her like ice water in her veins. Her son had been in the kitchen with Maria, helping make cookies, laughing about something on his tablet. Was he safe? Was he scared? Was he even alive? The gunfire intensified, closer now, and Isabella's cries reached the level of terror that made Selena's maternal instincts scream. She began the familiar bouncing motion while moving away from the window, humming desperately through her fear, trying to project calm she didn't feel. 15 minutes that felt like hours passed before silence fell over the house like a weighted blanket. When Selena finally heard Dante's voice calling her name, the relief nearly buckled her knees. She opened her door to find him striding down the hallway, his shirt torn and bloodied, his face a mask of barely controlled fury that made her step back instinctively. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands moving over her face and arms, checking for injuries with desperate efficiency. "Isabella? Is she okay?" "We're fine," Selena managed, though her voice was shaking badly. "What happened? Where's Miguel?" "Safe," Dante said immediately. "Maria got him to the panic room the moment the alarm started. He's scared but unharmed. This was meant for me, not for any of you." But the guilt in his voice told a different story. When Selena looked closer, she could see that beneath the anger was something that looked like devastation. "5 men tried to breach the property while I was at a meeting downtown," he continued, his hands still moving over her and Isabella as if he needed physical proof they were unharmed. "They knew my schedule, knew exactly when I'd be away. This was planned, coordinated. They were coming for Isabella." The words hit Selena like physical blows. "For Isabella?" she whispered. "They were going to take her?" Dante's jaw clenched so tight she was afraid he might crack teeth. "They know hurting me directly is nearly impossible, so they're targeting what I care about most. My daughter. And now you and Miguel too, because everyone in Chicago knows how much you mean to us." The admission of their importance to him should have been romantic, but right now it felt like a death sentence. Selena sank onto her bed, still holding Isabella, as the full reality of their situation crashed over her. "I'm sending you away," Dante said, his voice rough with emotion. "Tonight. There's a safe house in Montana, completely off the grid. You can stay there with Miguel and Isabella until this is resolved." "No." The word came out sharper than Selena intended, but she was surprised by her own certainty. Dante's eyes widened in shock at her refusal. "Selena, you don't understand the level of danger." "I understand perfectly," she interrupted, standing to face him. "I understand that there are people who want to hurt your daughter, and you think sending her away with strangers will keep her safer than keeping her close to the people who love her most. They're not strangers, they're trained professionals, who don't know that she only sleeps when someone hums Spanish lullabies, Selena said firmly. Who don't know that she gets hiccups when she cries too hard, or that she's afraid of sudden loud noises because of what happened tonight. You're asking me to take a traumatized baby away from the only home she's known and hide in the mountains while you fight a war. Dante raked his hands through his hair, leaving streaks of blood from his knuckles. This isn't a discussion, Selena. I won't have your blood on my hands because I was selfish enough to keep you here. And I won't abandon you when you need us most, Selena shot back. Miguel and I didn't have family before we came here, Dante. We didn't have anyone who would fight for us, who would protect us, who would care if we disappeared. You gave us that. You gave us a home and people who love us, and I'm not walking away from that just because it's dangerous. Dante stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You could die, he said quietly. All of you could die because of my choices, my family, my enemies. And we could die in a car accident tomorrow, or from cancer in 10 years, or from any of 1,000 random tragedies that have nothing to do with organized crime, Selena replied. Life doesn't come with guarantees, but love does come with choices. I'm choosing to stay. I'm choosing to fight. I'm choosing you. The last words hung in the air between them, more intimate than any declaration she'd ever made. Dante's eyes darkened as he processed what she'd just admitted, and when he moved toward her, there was something different in his expression, something that made heat spiral through her body despite the circumstances. You're choosing me, he repeated, his voice rough with wonder. Isabella had finally settled, exhausted from crying, and was sleeping heavily in Selena's arms. Without taking her eyes off Dante's face, Selena moved to place the baby in the portable crib Maria had set up in her bedroom, then turned back to find Dante watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I'm choosing all of you, she clarified, but her voice was softer now, intimate in the quiet room. Isabella needs me. Miguel is happy here for the first time in years, and you make me feel like I'm worth something more than just surviving. Dante closed the distance between them in 2 steps, his hands coming up to frame her face with gentle reverence. I love you, he said simply. I know it's too soon. I know the timing is impossible, but I love you, Selena. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you make my daughter smile. I love how you've made this house feel like a home instead of a monument to loss. The tears came without warning, relief and joy and terror all tangled together in her chest. I love you too, she whispered back. I love you and Isabella and this complicated, dangerous life we're building together. When he kissed her this time, it was different from the gentle exploration in the nursery. This was desperate, hungry, full of the knowledge that they might not have another chance to be together like this. Selena kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all of her fear and love and determination into the contact between their lips. His hands moved to the hem of her shirt, pausing in silent question, and she answered by reaching for the buttons of his bloody dress shirt. They undressed each other slowly despite the urgency, taking time to explore and memorize, to whisper words of love and promise against heated skin. When Dante laid her back on her bed, his touch was reverent, worshipful, like he was afraid she might disappear if he wasn't careful enough. Are you sure? He asked against her throat. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Selena replied, pulling his mouth back to hers. Their lovemaking was intense and emotional, a claiming and a promise and a desperate affirmation of life in the face of danger. Dante moved inside her with careful passion, whispering Italian endearments she didn't understand but felt in her bones, and Selena held him close enough to feel his heartbeat against her chest as they moved together toward completion. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets while Isabella slept peacefully nearby, and Selena traced the scars on Dante's chest with gentle fingers. Tell me about these, she said quietly. Knife fight when I was 22, he replied, catching her hand and pressing it flat against his heart. Bullet graze from 3 years ago. This one from a broken bottle in a bar fight before I learned to be more strategic about conflict resolution. Each scar was a reminder of the dangerous world she was choosing, but instead of fear, Selena felt only fierce protectiveness. Someone had hurt the man she loved, and she wanted to hunt down every person responsible. A soft knock on the door interrupted her violent thoughts. Dante sat up immediately, reaching for his gun from the nightstand. But Maria's voice came through the wood. Dante, you need to see this. We intercepted communications from the Torino family. Give us 5 minutes, Dante called back, already reaching for his clothes. This was the pause before the storm, Selena realized. The brief moment of peace before whatever came next. They dressed quickly and made their way to Dante's study, where Maria had Miguel waiting with a tablet and worried eyes. Her son ran to her immediately, and Selena knelt to hold him tight, checking him over for any signs of trauma from the afternoon's attack. I was brave, Mama, Miguel said into her shoulder. Just like you taught me. Maria said I was the bravest boy she'd ever seen. You were perfect. Mijo, Selena murmured, then looked up at Maria. What did you find? Maria handed Dante a tablet showing transcribed messages. They're not done, she said grimly. The attack this afternoon was just reconnaissance. They're planning something bigger tomorrow night, something that will force you to choose between your organization and your family. Dante's face went cold as he read the intercepted communications. They're going to take Isabella during the charity gala tomorrow, he said quietly. They know I have to attend because the other families will see absence as weakness, but they're planning to grab her while security is focused on protecting me at the event. Then we don't go to the gala, Selena said immediately. I have to go, Dante replied. If I don't show up, it's a sign that they've successfully made me afraid, and that will encourage every other family with a grudge to try similar tactics. But Isabella will be completely safe because you're taking her and Miguel to Montana tonight. Selena opened her mouth to argue, but Miguel spoke up first, his young voice serious in a way that broke her heart. Dante, he said, tugging on the man's sleeve. Are you going to marry my mama? The question came out of nowhere and hit like a lightning bolt. Dante looked down at Miguel with surprise, then at Selena with something that looked like hope and terror combined. Would you like me to marry your mama? Dante asked carefully. Miguel nodded emphatically. She's been sad for a long time, but she smiles all the time now. And Isabella needs a mama, and I always wanted a papa who could teach me things and play games and keep us safe. Out of the mouths of babes. Selena felt tears threatening again as she looked between her son and the man she loved, seeing the future Miguel was describing with startling clarity. I think that's a conversation for after we deal with the Torinos, Dante said gently, but his eyes on Selena were full of promise. Miguel seemed satisfied with this answer and went back to his tablet, but Selena noticed the way Dante kept glancing at her with new intensity, like he was seeing possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider before. The planning session lasted 3 more hours, with phone calls to loyal soldiers and strategic discussions about protecting what mattered most. By the time they finished, Selena was exhausted but determined. Tomorrow night, everything would change. One way or another, they were going to end this threat and build the life they all deserved. The war was coming, but for the first time since the gunfire started, Selena wasn't afraid. They had love, they had each other, and they had something worth fighting for. The attack came exactly as intelligence had predicted, but not in the way the Torino family had planned. Selena was in the kitchen with Miguel and Isabella when the motion sensors triggered, but instead of panic, she felt the calm focus that came from being prepared. For the past 24 hours, Dante's security team had been in position around the property, while Dante himself attended the charity gala as planned, playing the role of the confident underboss who refused to be intimidated. But the real trap had been set here, in the home they were supposedly trying to protect. Miguel, take Isabella to the safe room like we practiced, Selena said calmly, lifting the baby from her high chair and handing her to her son. The 10-year-old moved with the serious efficiency they'd rehearsed, disappearing through the hidden panel behind the bookshelf, while Selena activated the silent alarm that would bring Dante's men flooding the property. Through the kitchen window, she watched 3 figures in black scale the garden wall with professional precision. They moved like soldiers, coordinated and confident, clearly believing they were about to find an easy target in a protected house. They had no idea that Dante had spent 2 days turning his home into a fortress designed to capture rather than repel invaders. The first man made it through the back door before the tranquilizer dart dropped him unconscious to the marble floor. The second managed 3 steps into the kitchen before Dante's Lieutenant Marco appeared from his hiding place behind the pantry, gun drawn and smile cold. The third never made it inside at all, taken down by the sniper positioned in the old oak tree that overlooked the garden. It was over in 90 seconds. 20 minutes later, Dante burst through the front door with fury written across every line of his body. His expensive tuxedo rumpled from the drive across the city at dangerous speeds. His eyes found Selena immediately, and the relief that crossed his face was so intense it made her chest tighten. "Are they safe?" he demanded, pulling her into his arms before she could answer. "Miguel, Isabella, are they hurt?" "Safe room, like we planned," Selena said against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with adrenaline and fear. Miguel was incredible, Dante. He got Isabella there in under 30 seconds and stayed calm the entire time. Dante's arms tightened around her, and she felt the tremor in his hands that he was trying to hide. "When I got the signal that they'd breached the property," he said quietly, "I thought I might lose everything that mattered in one night." "But you didn't," Selena said firmly. "Your plan worked. We're all safe, and now we have the people who've been threatening us." The interrogation of the captured men revealed everything Dante needed to know about the scope of the threat against his family. The Torino organization had been planning a coordinated attack designed to cripple Dante's operations by taking his daughter and holding her until he agreed to hand over territory and business interests. What they hadn't anticipated was that Dante Moretti had spent 15 years building a reputation for swift, decisive retaliation that made enemies think twice about targeting what was his. By dawn, the Torino family's leadership had been neutralized permanently. Their remaining soldiers had fled Chicago, and the message had been sent clearly to any other family considering similar tactics. Dante Moretti's family was untouchable, and attempting to harm them came with consequences that no rational person would risk. For the first time since Selena had moved into the mansion 6 weeks earlier, the house felt completely peaceful. 1 week later, on a sunny Saturday morning, Dante found Selena in the garden reading to Isabella while Miguel kicked a soccer ball against the back wall. The domestic scene made him pause in the doorway, watching the way sunlight caught in Selena's dark hair as she animated the story with voices and gestures that made both children laugh. This was what happiness looked like, he realized. Not the temporary satisfaction of successful business deals or eliminated threats, but this quiet contentment of family life, this sense of coming home to people who loved him not despite his flaws, but because of how those flaws made him human. Miguel spotted him first and came running with the boundless energy of a 10-year-old who discovered that having a father figure meant someone who would throw a football in the backyard and help with homework and attend school events without complaint. "Dante," Miguel said, slightly out of breath from running. "Can we talk about something important?" "Of course," Dante replied, settling on the garden bench beside Selena and Isabella. "What's on your mind? Are you going to ask Mama to marry you?" Miguel asked with the directness that only children could manage. "Because if you are, I want to help. I have ideas about the ring and everything." Selena nearly dropped the book she was reading, her cheeks flushing pink with embarrassment. "Miguel," she started, but Dante held up a hand to stop her. "Actually," Dante said, his eyes on Selena's face, "I was hoping you'd help me with exactly that." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made Selena's breath catch in her throat. Inside was the most beautiful ring she'd ever seen, a vintage setting with a center diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the morning light like captured stars. "Selena Rodriguez," Dante said, sliding off the bench to kneel in the grass before her, "will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve the love you've given Isabella and me? Will you let us be a real family, all 4 of us together?" Miguel was practically vibrating with excitement beside her, and Isabella was reaching for the sparkly ring with baby fingers, but all Selena could see was Dante's face, the hope and love and vulnerability written there as he waited for her answer. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." The kiss that followed was interrupted by Miguel's cheering and Isabella's delighted babbling, but Selena had never been happier to be interrupted. As Dante slipped the ring onto her finger and Miguel declared it the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, Selena felt the last piece of her heart settle into place. They were really going to be a family. The wedding planning consumed the next 2 months in the most wonderful way possible. Dante's mother, Elena Moretti, embraced Selena and Miguel with the fierce love of someone who'd been waiting years to have more family to spoil. Miguel thrived under the attention of his new grandmother, while Isabella had begun saying mama when she wanted Selena, a development that made both Dante and Selena cry happy tears every single time. The ceremony took place in the garden behind their home, transformed with thousands of white flowers and soft lighting into something magical. Selena wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit perfectly, while Miguel walked her down the aisle with the serious pride of someone who understood he was gaining not just a stepfather, but an entire extended family who would love and protect him forever. Isabella served as the flower girl. Though at 11 months old, her contribution was mostly sitting in her decorated stroller and clapping at all the pretty lights. But the sight of her in a tiny white dress with flower petals in her dark hair made every guest smile through their tears. When Dante saw Selena walking toward him, his composure finally cracked completely. This woman had saved his daughter, had brought joy back into his house, had chosen to love him despite the dangers of his world, and now she was becoming his wife in front of everyone who mattered to them. "I love you," he mouthed as she reached him, and her smile was radiant enough to power the entire city. The vows they exchanged were personal and heartfelt, written together during late-night conversations about the life they wanted to build. Dante promised to protect and cherish not just Selena but Miguel as well, to be the father the boy deserved and the husband Selena had dreamed of. Selena promised to love Dante and Isabella with everything she had, to make their house a home filled with laughter and warmth and the kind of security that came from being deeply known and completely accepted. When Father Martinez declared them husband and wife, the kiss that sealed their marriage was witnessed by 3 generations of the Moretti family, Miguel's proud cheering, and Isabella's happy babbling from the front row. The reception lasted until well past midnight, with traditional Italian music mixed with the Spanish songs that reminded Selena of her childhood, dancing that ranged from elegant to ridiculous, and toasts that made everyone cry. Miguel stayed awake far past his bedtime, charming every adult with his newfound confidence and joy, while Isabella fell asleep in Selena's arms during the father-daughter dance, completely content in the arms of the woman who'd become her mother in every way that mattered. Have you ever attended a wedding that made you believe in fairy tale endings? I'd love to know in the comments what moments from your own love story remind you that sometimes the best things come from taking chances on unexpected connections. But the most perfect moment came at the very end of the night, when the last guests had gone home and the cleanup was finished. Selena and Dante sat on their bedroom balcony, still in their wedding clothes, watching the sunrise paint the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and pink. "No regrets?" Dante asked softly, playing with her new wedding ring. "Only that it took us so long to get here," Selena replied, leaning into his side. "I keep thinking about that night on the airplane, how terrified you were of Isabella's crying, how desperate I was for any opportunity to change our lives. We had no idea we were about to find everything we'd been searching for." "Isabella cried for a reason that night," Dante said thoughtfully. "She knew we needed each other, even when we didn't know it ourselves." 1 year later, on a private beach in Sicily where Dante's family had owned property for generations, Selena watched her husband build elaborate sandcastles with Miguel while Isabella napped in her beach tent, and marveled at how completely their lives had transformed. She was 4 months pregnant with their second child, a fact they discovered just weeks earlier and shared only with their immediate family. Miguel was thriving in his private school, had learned basic Italian from his new grandmother, and had started calling Dante Papa with the easy acceptance that came from being truly wanted. Isabella had taken her first steps just last month, toddling between Selena and Dante with the fearless confidence of a child who'd never known anything but love and security. The threats that had once seemed so terrifying were distant memory now. Dante had gradually shifted his focus from active operations to legitimate business interests, using his connections and strategic mind to build an empire that didn't require violence to maintain. He was still respected in his world, but more as an elder statesman than an active soldier, and the distinction had brought him peace he'd never thought possible. Watching him now, building ridiculous towers in the sand while Miguel directed the architectural details with serious concentration, Selena could barely remember the grief-stricken stranger from the airplane who hadn't known how to comfort his own daughter. "Mama," Isabella said, toddling over from her tent with the unsteady gait of new walking skills. She'd learned the word months ago, but never tired of using it, especially when she wanted attention or snuggles. "Come here, beautiful girl," Selena said, scooping Isabella onto her lap and breathing in the sweet scent of baby shampoo and sunshine. "Did you have a good nap?" Isabella babbled happily, pointing at the castle construction project with obvious desire to participate. Selena carried her over to where Dante and Miguel were debating the merits of moats versus drawbridges, and felt her heart swell with contentment as Dante immediately made space for both of them in the sandy construction zone. This was their life now. Morning routine with breakfast and coffee while Isabella practiced new words and Miguel told them about school projects. Lazy afternoons when Dante came home early to spend time with his family. Evening baths and bedtime stories and the kind of domestic happiness that had once seemed impossible. The baby growing inside her was already loved by siblings who couldn't wait to meet them, by a father who'd proven his devotion 1,000 times over, by a mother who'd finally learned what it meant to be completely secure in love that wouldn't disappear when times got difficult. As the sun began to set over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold, Dante pulled Selena close while Miguel chased waves and Isabella played with shells in the sand. "Happy?" he asked, the same question he asked her every day, like he still couldn't quite believe this was real. "Beyond happy," Selena replied, the same answer she gave every day, because it was true every single time. "We're exactly where we're supposed to be." And watching their children play in the waves while the man she loved held her close, Selena knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with a stranger's kindness 30,000 feet above the ground, in the space between fear and hope, in the moment when two people decide to trust each other enough to build something extraordinary together. Their fairy tale had begun with a crying baby on a midnight flight, and it would continue for all the years to come, filled with the kind of love that transforms not just two hearts, but an entire family, creating something stronger and more beautiful than either of them had ever dared to dream possible.